Cool. So let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's Fireside Chat event. I'm Jonathan Jennings, and today our guest and the person I'll be interviewing is game lecturer, game researcher, and game consultant Katryna Starks, Dr. Katryna Starks. I would love to know, Katryna, could you give us like a brief introduction and tell us a bit about what you do and your work? Yeah.
Um, okay, so I'm Dr. Katryna Starks, and currently I am working at the University of Illinois, and I'm teaching game design there. I've taught game design, I'd say, for about, I'll say at least 6 solid years. I started teaching while I was doing my PhD, as you do. I've taught, I've created an interactive narrative not a major, but an interactive narrative major within a serious games degree. And Also, I was happened to be at U.S. University of Sunshine Coast, which is where I got my doctorate, when they started up a serious games design bachelor. So I helped create that. At the University of Illinois, I have taught. We've got a game studies and design minor, and I've taught in the core course GSD 101, in which we created a board game. And the board game, we've got a park that was uh, designed by um, a geographer, and so it's shaped like a board game from the sky. You could see that it looks like a board game. So our board game actually had an addendum of rules that could be played live, and we've done that. And I also teach serious games there, as well as a gender and games class, and I'm having a blast. It's amazing.
Wow. So you teach, I mean, games across the board, really, right? Like games and different aspects of game development and kind of, um, different kind of considerations while making a game, right? I think that's safe to say.
Yes. And Illinois, the university actually has a escape room design class, which I have not taken and I haven't taught, but I would love to do that.
That sounds fun. Wow. Okay. Wow. Well, very cool. I'm super excited to interview you and, help everybody else kind of learn about the awesome work you're doing in terms of like, games teaching and researching. Before we get really deep into the weeds, I want to start by asking you to tell us about your love for fancy pens and what qualities are that you look for in a good quality pen.
Oh my gosh. So I have one right here. So I love pens. So I'll show off, like, this is a Sharpie pen that I have, which is really fancy. I found out that there were red ones. So I have this now as well. You can see. And then Game Studies and Design decided that they were going to get pens, and they look very much like the Sharpie pens. So this is a Game Studies and Design pen, and whenever I meet speakers, I give this to them. But my piece to so I have a few fountain pens. I love fountain pens. I love the way the ink flows. They're usually really pretty. But a few years ago, I found something called a Namiki Vanishing Point. They have cheaper versions now. So my piece de resistance, which was actually, I think, $25, is this. So this seems like just a regular pen.
Awesome.
Oh, can you
Great.
see it?
Yeah, it's green screening. Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh gosh, let me see if I have a different one. I'll just do this one because it's green screening. Sorry.
Yeah.
So you can see this, right? Is this better?
Uh, if you hold it in front of you, it's a little bit better, but yeah, it's a lot there. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so here we go. So this
Mhm.
is like a regular plain old thing, except can you see that?
Oh, wow, that's
It is
wild.
a retractable fountain pen. um, so retractable fountain pens, they used to be only made by a company. It's called Namiki, and the Namiki was bought by Pilot, or maybe it was a subsidiary of Pilot. So over in China, fountain pens are like pens. You just use them. So if you happen to be on eBay and you happen to find pens from China, you can find fountain pens that are relatively cheap and also very beautiful. So the Namiki, because they were the only retractable fountain pen on the market. They must have had like a patent or something. Those pens have gone up in price. They were kind of cheap when I only have one. I got mine. And then now I think they're about $300 or so. And then they come out with special editions that are a little more. I don't have them at that thing. But the thing is, the green one that I showed you, that I was trying to show you, this one, also retractable fountain pen.
Uh-huh.
These are like $30 because they're the knockoffs, but they're still retractable fountain pens. And I don't know what's going to happen when they get popular. Either the price will go up or the price will go down, and they'll be everywhere. Um, but no, but like the the nibs are pretty good. I've started off trying to get a new nib for my old pen, but then I really like these, so they were like $30. So I was like, oh, okay, I can get like one a month for a few. As I only have three, I stopped myself. But I just always want to have one around, and they're like I have a purple one and a green one, and I think I can't remember. Those might be the only two that I have actually. So yeah, and then some of these pens, like I cannot remember there's like Fountain Pen Hospital and another company. And these pens, they've got like diamonds in them. They're gold. They go up to like $1,500, which I won't ever use. Like I love pens. I'm probably not going to get a $1,500 one, but they're just gorgeous, and they're like, super like Ferrari type pens, and there's collections, and I love pens. Not only fountain pens though, but I just always like, pretty pens like the Sharpies that I showed you were writing pens, but they're pretty, but they're not fountain pens. But yes, I kind of have a pen obsession. And it's sort of justified
For sure.
because when I was doing my PhD, I kept having writer's block. And what I realized is, because I was trying to write on the computer, and what I realized is that the way my brain works, just your hand activates your brain when you're writing sometimes. So I realized that I actually need to take out a notebook and start writing in pen. Once I get a few paragraphs down, I can switch to trying to type them. And then once I start typing what I've written, my mind is then flowing, and I can type from then on. But I really have to start with pen and paper. So um, I'm not going to say that justifies my obsession, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to.
Right, right. And I get it. I think I'm kind of the same in the sense that like I feel like if I really want to remember something, I need to write it down with a pen or pencil. Like I can remember, I have pretty good memory, but like the stuff I want to make sure I don't forget, I have to write it down physically. And it's like it's in. Like the moment I write it down, it's gonna stick. And so it's interesting. That's super interesting how that works. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I once heard someone say, "If it wasn't written, it wasn't said," and that's literally my life motto. I'd have to, it has to be written somewhere.
Right, right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's good for all your students to know the pins that you're grading their papers with, right? Like that's really um,
That's
um,
digital now, but
oh, all right, fair. Well, yeah, I tried. Yeah.
I should probably get a Wacom and like have a nice little
Oh, there we go. Oof. Oof. Yeah. Oh man, have those
that I
like
can
handwritten notes on the papers or whatever, right? Yeah.
definitely.
And so I guess to kind of continue the discussion, what initially drew you to teaching game development?
Well, this is kind of a long off the beaten path story. The way I got into games research or any games academia, I accidentally used The Sims as a life coach. So I played vanilla. You can laugh, it's fine. So I played vanilla Sims, and I think I did what everybody does. I made a character. She looked like me as much as I could make her. And then The Sims lets you not just make a physical character, but you can assign them personalities. And then, so I assigned her a personality that was like mine, all the personality traits that, I thought I was. And then you get to basically just direct them through life. So, tell them to do regular stuff, like do the dishes, go to work, do, whatever. So she did the things that I thought were important. She went to work, she studied, she exercised, which I don't do, but I thought it was really important for her. So she was like, what I thought was kind of the best version of me. And I left out one thing. So her social media was always in the red, and Sims kind of have their own personalities. So when her social media was constantly in the red, she looked up at me and like she would yell at me, and her speech bubbles would have like little people in them, like I want to talk to somebody. I didn't even get her a phone at first because I was like, she's just doing stuff, and I forgot to put a phone in the house. And one time, like when she got super desperate, there are Sims that kind of walk along the street, and she ran outside just to talk to somebody, completely ignored my commands. And I thought, okay, that's really bad. And I took a step back and I realized my social meter was in the red. That's the part where I was lacking, because The Sims, it's like living your life, but I don't have life meters on my life. But when I played The Sims, there were like little meters that would tell me, red, yellow, green, how was I doing in all these areas? And social was always in the red. It was always lacking. And for I think most people are probably familiar with The Sims, but for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a traffic light system. So green is good, yellow is like and then red means that you're not doing well in that area. So when I say my social meter was in the red, both my characters and mine, that's what I'm talking about. So for me, I'm a Christian. I went to church every Sunday, but we had two services. So the morning service, everybody like scrambled afterwards because they had places to go and things to do. But there was a night service that had a bunch of people that were kind of, college-ish age. It's in LA. So it was we basically there was only one service and we would all go out to dinner afterwards. And so then you get some social time and you get to know the people that and it was a really tight-knit group. Several of them lived in the same apartment complex. They nicknamed it Melrose Place. And like when there was a Super Bowl party or the Oscars party or whatever, they would all have parties in that one complex. And it was kind of like you come by, you bring something for the host and leave it at the first apartment you go to. And then there were like five or six that you could kind of go through. So I ended up getting I got a social life and my social meter is no longer in the red. And that was a wonderful time. But that made me think, I realized this was basically diagnostic. It was a game, but I was self-diagnosing when I didn't realize it. And so I thought, is anybody doing this? Is there anyone who's doing this deliberately? I scoured the internet. I found one psychologist who was using it for teenagers. They would create their family and then kind of walk through that, but nobody else is really doing that. And so that just got me into the idea that games can be something more than entertainment. They're entertaining, but while you're having fun, you can be learning about yourself in ways that you didn't imagine, and that there are deliberate games that could actually do that. So that led me to a master's and eventually a PhD in psychology, both studying games in different aspects, and then game teaching and research and all of that.
Wow. That's profound. Like that's really profound, right? Like what a what an interesting mirror, right? To see like this virtual you and how she's kind of operating and go, "Oh wow, we have a problem," right? Like wow. Yeah, like how long did it take you to process that, right? Because like I'm sure it took a little bit for that to click, right? I imagine.
Um, Yeah, I mean, I've always been kind of introspective. I'm an only child, so didn't have a whole lot to do other than that. But I think it wasn't. I didn't go in there thinking that that's what I was going to find out. I took a while as far as because I was trying to just play the game and get
Yeah.
all of the meters in the red and get her. She noticed it before I did because she was mad at me, and I'm like, "Stop! What do I need to do? I need to get you a phone. I need to get you friends." And then it was like, "Wait, I don't have friends. I am in this computer giving my virtual self friends, and I need to do that for me." So it was a gradual process.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. And I love that like you not only saw it as like a way to like, self-diagnose as you kind of described, but like you saw it as like kind of an avenue of like, if you're able to get this benefit from learning from the games you're playing, then you can do that for others, right? And I think that's awesome. And I think that's such a great perspective to come to teaching from, in terms of being able to know what kind of feeling and what kind of knowledge and connection you're hoping that you can help create and kind of present to your students. And so that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I guess with that said, like what kind of background do your students usually come to you with, like when they're first interested in game development? Like, yeah.
Well, it depends on what they're focusing on. So, um, if they're doing art and narrative, they've probably done a little of it. A lot. hardly anyone's done interactive narrative, but the artists have probably done some art, maybe not digital, but they've been drawing and doing some stuff. Some of the programming students have been messing around with programming a little bit, but we do get people who walk in cold. Hardly anybody has actually, well, um, I think that's changing as we go. I started a few years ago, but when I first started, hardly anybody had actually made any games on their own. Now, a few students will come to the program having made a game or two, but usually video games. Hardly anybody's made a tabletop game. Every once in a while, Dungeons and Dragons has made a huge comeback. So we do get people who've had DM experience, but they come from all different types of experience. We do accept people who have no experience whatsoever and just want to learn. I think the thing that I think probably needs to be, we need to be a bit better at, or things that they will get if they come to class, is they'll get exposure to a variety of games. So while I do have a variety of experience levels, I've had a student who said, I love video games. What have you played? Call of Duty. Okay, what else have you played? Call of Duty. Have you played anything else? No, just Call of and there's nothing wrong with Call of Duty. I'm not bashing the game. But um they'll come in and they've played like the big AAA games. And what they get from me, at least, is exposure to some of the smaller games. And then some of this, you can have a lot of meaning in large games, but some of the smaller indie games, that's where you have a chance to really get into some meaning and different mechanics and different things that they haven't been exposed to. One of the games that I love exposing my students to is Rollers of the Realm. it takes it's a pinball RPG game, so you actually like roll the characters at each other to do combat. And so it's like this story, but it takes place on a pinball table. And I just thought that was hilarious that they would like take two genres and row them together like that. But there's also really, really cool games. Gorogoa is like a not yeah, I think it's Gorogoa. It's like a visual masterpiece of a puzzle game, and Florence is really good at marrying the emotion of the game to the mechanics of the game, so that you do what your character is feeling. So there's lots of just little hidden gems. Beyond Eyes, you play a little blind girl who's like 8 or 9 years old, and she goes through the city looking for a cat. And because she's blind, the way that and she lost her sight, so she can imagine what things look like. But the way that you play the game is she's going forward and everything is white until she gets close enough to touch it. And so, there's this one part where she's crossing a bridge over a river, and you just kind of have to guess where the bridge is. And then you see the little bridge, and you're like, okay, I can step forward now. And it's just inch by inch, and you don't know when the bridge ends, but you just see as she steps forward, you can see more of the bridge because she's putting her hand on it. Or you'll be going forward, and she walks really slowly, and then you hit this place and you're thinking you're just going and going and going, and then a wall springs up in front of you because she's touching the wall because she can finally get there. So yeah, some of these smaller games are just amazing, and I get to expose my students to just all kinds of games that they would not have necessarily found on their own.
Right. And I guess is there when you like kind of expose students to like the variety of games, like is there a goal like in just the practice of it, like exploring new games? Like what are you hoping that they gain from that?
Well, I'm hoping that they don't think that games are just one thing. One of the things about studying games that people don't consider is you can convince the student, but you also have to convince the parents and everybody else around them that games are more than Grand Theft Auto and Call of Duty, which is what a lot of people think. That they think, oh, it's video games, it's ultra violent, and or they think it's frivolous. Putting myself in the shoes of the character in Beyond Eyes, I mean, obviously I wear glasses. I don't have perfect vision, but that was a very different experience of experiencing life as her. So I want them to know there's more to games than what you've seen, than the AAA things that are in your face. But also, if they want to be designers, they need to expose themselves to different mechanics, different ways of seeing, different ways of being in games. They need to know there's more that they can do. Um, right now, I have an undergrad class that I'm teaching gender in games, and I'm hoping for that class that they just see a variety of amazing female protagonists that they hadn't been exposed to. And also we're looking at the players and the makers, and we're exploring, maybe what are these different communities and how can we make them better around games. I've got a graduate class, and that one skews more towards serious games because we've got a minor, and the minor means everybody has a major, and we're hoping that they will be able to incorporate game design into what they're doing. So we've got people who are doing English as a second language. We've got people who are doing stories of place and architecture. We've got all kinds of students running the gamut, and they're learning how to incorporate game design into that. So things like for language learning, I would love to. I'm going to show them things like Heaven's Vault, which is a game that I'm assuming they probably have never heard of, and the way that it's not a real language, but the way that she goes and she has to match symbols with symbols and then put a sentence together and based on context go, okay, that's probably what it means. That which is kind of the process of trying to pick your way through a new language that you don't know. And there's I just I've had people come in and the first thing I ask them is, how do games fit into your major? How do games fit into your research? And there's so many times when I hear people say, I don't really know. I think this is just a fun class. And I'm like, no, games fit into what you're doing. There's a game that matches what you do. So yeah, I just it's something they need to know if they're going to be designers. They need to get their head around everything that games can be. And then also I hope that they just come away with something that new games to play that they're inspired to play. And also, especially when I teach game making, even with Twine, which I've taught a lot, I want to make better critics. So my students, they will come out having made a game. So they're not going to be the ones who are like, where's can you just make it multiplayer? Isn't it just a button? No, they're like, I mean, even with Twine, which is the easiest game maker, game engine ever. I've taught 6-year-olds how to use Twine. Um, Basically, I could tell when my students started creating their project because my criteria was you have to have at least 2 endings, otherwise it doesn't branch, but no more than 4 because we only have a semester. And they would pester me and go, "Can I write this? And can I write that? And can I do this?" It was like, do I have to restrict myself to 4 endings? And I said yes, because you only have a semester. And I can tell they hadn't started yet. When they actually start, the questions change. Do I have to have 4 endings? I'm like, no, you'll have to. They're like terrified. Do I have to put 4 endings in there? And it's like, no, you don't have to branch quite that much. You can if you want to. And they're asking, do I have to include all of these random things? So I could tell that they are grasping as they try to, they're not really talking their assignment down. They're just having to remind themselves of the difference between what I actually assigned them and their dreams. And they're
Correct.
scoping down to what I actually said they have to do
Right.
because I
Right.
know the scope. But I'm hoping that they understand that there's a lot of work that's put into games. It's not just this frivolous fly by night. Oh, I like to play and make games easy. And I really hope that, hopefully they go into games as a profession. But those who don't, at least they will understand a little bit of the nuances and the work that goes into putting a game together, and they will appreciate the people who do make games and be better and more fair game critics and players if they don't become makers.
Wow, that's fair. That's super fair. And I think I mean scope management is such a critical aspect of game development, right? And I think it's such a, like you said, there's so many things that are so easy to say as a feature, right? Like, let's just make it multiplayer. I don't know why they didn't do X, Y, and Z, not knowing the million other systems that X, Y, and Z would set off and have to be adjusted, right? And so I think that's a really practical and useful way to kind of teach students how to edit themselves, because I think that's super important for all creatives, right? To be able to just kind of edit ourselves and our expectations to, like, there's what we'd want to do, there's perfect fantasy, and then there's what's going to get out the door, right?
Exactly.
And so I guess one thing I'm curious about is, like, you've mentioned you've had students that come in that they've already worked on games and stuff. You've had students who have come in and, like, they're fresh, right? And maybe your program is really the only exposure they've had to really games education. Um, is there anything you notice different between students who come in who already have kind of like a self-taught background a little bit versus students who are like I've kind of only learned games in an academic environment.
Um, I think uh I think mostly it's probably skill, and it really depends. I've had students who've had trouble figuring out um who didn't have a game background. They had trouble figuring out who they are in the group, for instance. So I had a
Right.
student come in and they said, you know, my group isn't doing a lot. I'm coming up with all the game ideas and I'm coming up with the story and I'm coming with all of that. And they were kind of complaining and saying, like, I'm carrying the group. And I said, that's because you're in the planning stage. Are you an artist? No. Do you have an artist? Yes. Okay. Well, as soon as you start producing the game, and I said, are you the programmer? Nope. Do you have a programmer in the group? Yep. And I was like, they're going to come in. So I had to talk them through the fact that, you're doing the planning and the story, which is awesome. When they start making the game, you're going to probably take a step back, and then they're going to be leading because they actually have to produce the product. So, I think programmers come in and I think they have a better perspective on, like, how many people are going to be needed to do this, and artists and people who've done a little are maybe a little bit more aware that they need a team and that they cannot do it all. But they take the opportunity to get better at what it is that they do. And I think also, I don't know if there's a difference in attitude, but one of the things that happens when they do group work is some people who have been artists will say, now that we're in a group and we have to make a game, we're all learning the same engine. So I want to try to do some programming, or I want to try to do some narrative. And it gives them a safe space to step away from what they know and try something new instead of coming in, for instance, as an artist and being locked into being an artist and having that expectation that they will just be the artist. So hopefully, and they usually like those experiences, and they don't, it's a semester. They don't have to make Skyrim. It's fine.
Right.
They can just make their little game. But they enjoy that the opportunity to do something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you a big fan of game jams? Because I've heard people use game jams for exactly that kind of environment to like just explore, not doing the thing that you do all the time, right?
Uh, so over at the Sunshine Coast University, we did game jams every year. We were always a part of the global game jam. So and we did it the old-fashioned way. We would have like two or three classrooms, and you bring at the last one we told them to go home, but they used to do the whole, like, they would bring their big huge desktop boxes, their gaming rigs, and a bean bag, and that's where they would stay for 48 hours. Those were really fun. And then I think the rest of the school caught wind of it and was like, for liability, we should probably make them go home. So we would just make them go home. The last one, we made them go home at like midnight and come back at 6 a.m. But with game jams, yeah, it is a free for all. It's everybody pitching an idea based on the theme. And I've done those. They're a lot of fun. We get people, and with game jams, we would open them up to our students, but they were also open to the rest of the school. So it was also an opportunity for people who were floating around, didn't even necessarily know we had a games program, majoring in something else. And we would advertise, you can come in for a game jam. So people could come in, our students could try what they didn't know that they were good at. And then other students could come in and figure out that, you can make a game in a weekend. That's
Hmm.
awesome. And they would collaborate. So those were always fun. And I highly recommend that if anybody's interested in making games at all, I always send people to itch.io because they have so many game jams, and they're all virtual, and you can just join one and then find a team and make a game, or use it as an excuse to force yourself to learn an engine that you'd been wanting to learn, or do something that you'd been wanting to do, that you just didn't have the time for. So the game, it's like you have an excuse, or you have a deadline. I have a game jam. I need to take 2 weeks and do this, and so it's a pathway to that. So I highly recommend it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I also agree for people who aren't traditionally creative. I think game jams are, extremely with the right team, they can be really supportive, but I think they're great exploratory environments. One of my favorite games I've worked on, we had like a woman who basically works in like publishing and like marketing and just the biz dev side of games. And she like really wanted to like write and come up with the theme and story of the game. And so for the game jam, she did, and she did fantastic work on the narrative, but it was so outside the box. It was just a space she couldn't explore. She pulled out all sorts of references, like to represent the character and different personality archetypes they could be. And like, just I could imagine like for all of us, it was a fun project, but especially for her, like you get to go from biz dev world to like I'm making a character, I'm making a being in this games universe. And she had nothing. She was sharing. I think she shared the game even more than I do, and I'm on social media way too much. So yeah. So I
Yeah.
think for her it was a great chance to just kind of step out of her comfort zone.
Right. And it's creativity with relatively low pressure too. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
the pressure of the time of finishing the game, but you know, I don't know that any at games jams, if someone says I'll do the narrative, it's not like someone has any set of expectations. Like for instance, she's in marketing. Her
right,
clients are going to have expectations for how she represents their product. Game jams, you if you raise your hand and say I'll do the narrative, usually if nobody else wants to do the narrative, they're like whatever you come up with, that's
right.
what we'll do. So
Yeah, right. Yeah.
it's a very freeing space.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally, yeah, no, that makes total sense. And then I guess kind of more in terms of like kind of talking more about like career development, right? And like job searching. In your experience, do you think people who learn game development in academic settings have an easier time when searching for jobs versus maybe self-taught developers of any skill set?
It depends. I'm going to be really honest. People who have great programming skills are in demand, and if you're great at programming, it doesn't matter whether you're self-taught or not. However, what you do get is, for instance, I've had a student. So what we would do is we brought companies in, and they would pitch the seniors for the capstone project, and the seniors would have to, they'd have to create a capstone project. We would encourage them to create a project based on what these real companies came in and pitched, because then they can on their CV they could say I worked on this game and it's at this website for this big company that people have heard of. But they could also do their own. We did have one student, the utility company came in, and they wanted a game to teach people what you could and could not flush. Because if people flush the wrong thing, it would get caught in the it gets caught in the pipes. And one of the biggest things is like baby wipes or like hand wipes or face wipes. They say they're flushable, but they're really not. And they were really trying to get people to understand like you can't flush these things. They will clog up the pipes and cause problems with the utility company later on, not necessarily in your house, but it's just every household doing certain things. So they were trying to they had a few other examples of things that you shouldn't flush that people think that it's okay to flush. And so she took them on as a capstone project. And she created a game that was supposed to teach what you could and couldn't flush. And they liked it so much that they considered her as a prototype. And then they hired her to create the real one so that it was fully funded by the utility company. Another thing that happens in school is you meet great people to team up with, because you end up doing group work in our program. People were in so many, they were in groups, probably I guess 75% of their classes they were making a game with a group of people, so they got to try out different personalities, like work with different personalities, understand who they were in a team. And a few of those teams went on to become fledgling indie companies because they liked working with each other and they had so many ideas between themselves that they couldn't finish. um, Another group, there was a person who happened to be from, I think he was from South Africa, and he understood all of the nuances of poaching. And so they made a game about poaching, and it was really sympathetic because he understood that the people doing the poaching weren't necessarily, they were trying to live, and then there were the people who were anti-poaching, and they were trying to. I think you found a place where the poaches were, and you could go let the animals out of the cages and rescue them in the game. And then there were corrupt people in the rich people in the front end who were causing some of the poaching to happen. And a wildlife conservation group really liked their game and invited them to actually go on safari with them and actually do some field research to to make their game better. So exposing and even, there's big, which exposes people to people in the industry. But when you're just self-taught and you're kind of out there and you're not university affiliated and you don't have a group, it's difficult to meet some of the people who have the money and need the games, or even people in the industry who can talk to you and mentor you, even if it's just a guest lecture. And we are games is it's big, but it's small. So if a lot of it is jobs are getting your foot in the door. If you've got the skills, you then have to meet the people. So what you can do in a university setting, or in a setting like big, which everybody is unfortunately not aware of, but you can meet the people and you get your name up there, and you might be able to show them a game or two, and then when the job comes through, you can then put your portfolio in and they can go, oh, I know you from somewhere, or I know that you know these three people that I really respect. And I respect their work. And so I'm going to take a chance and you're going to get an interview, whereas somebody else might not. So the networking aspect of it is really something that is difficult to do when you're self-taught. And self-taught people, unfortunately, we tell them about conferences, but I mean, GDC isn't cheap. So where the people are, you have to have a lot of extra money, time, whatever, what have you, to get into those places. Whereas students will invite those people to guest lecture, and they'll be in your classroom, or we'll be able to we get to go to those places if we're speaking, and then we can make introductions and things like that. So you get to meet people.
For sure. And so I have a question I want to ask about serious games, but I'm going to do that after. I guess, so I guess, you've spoken to a lot of pros and like the advantages of going to school for a games education. Are there any cons that you feel that are, challenges to getting a games education?
uh well, in America, the challenge is money, I think, because I started off in Australia, and there's a different school system. I think they're loans, but you basically pay them back when you pay your taxes every year in small increments, and you don't have to start paying them until you reach a certain income level. And it's a really different system. So education at the time you're going for your education, it's kind of free. And so in America, you take on a lot of debt, and I think that's the biggest debate is, what am I going to do? I'm going to come out of this experience owing thousands of dollars, and are the jobs going to be there, and am I going to be able to pay it back, and what's going to happen with that? So I think that's why people go the self-taught route. Um, how and also another thing I think is that when people take games education, games education is not like other education. So if you're going in for social studies, you read your textbook, you do your homework. If you do those two things, you probably understand social studies a lot, because it's about a thought exercise. With games, in order to get good, you can't just do your homework. You have to do 10 hours outside of your homework, because it just takes time to build the skills, and there's nothing we can do about that. We can curate content for you so that you're not running out all over the internet. We can find if you want a tutorial, we'll find the best tutorials. We have personal experience, and we'll teach you tips and tricks that we found. So you get curated information, but as much as we've done, you still have to practice. And so I think maybe the people who are self-taught might come into it having a better grasp of the work involved. So it's not just like, oh, I like games, so I'm taking games, and I think they're fun to play. Um, and then they get kind of a reality check when you realize that you have to make them and how much work is involved. So, I mean, the thing is, the people who are in universities, they'll learn all of that really quickly. They'll decide whether they want to make games or not very quickly, because they'll see that their work. But
Mhm.
the things that the people who are self-taught have is they will already know that they're willing to do the work, or they won't, because they've done it on their own.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the things that still sticks with me, my professors when I was in college, the most important thing he said to the whole class, and he repeated this all the time. He was always like, if you only do the stuff we do in class, you won't get a job. Like I promise you, right? Like that's not
Exactly.
enough, right? And yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great point, right? Like I think it's kind of an intimacy of knowledge, right? Like, and
Right.
games are such a dream job that like if you don't put in that time, someone else will, and that's your
Right.
competition, right? Uh,
Right. Another thing that I hope people learn when they're self-taught, but I'm not sure if there's aware. I am very upfront with my students about the fact that, jobs are kind of wishy-washy in games, but the thing that I always tell them is learn the technology it takes to make games because that technology is used everywhere. So if you learn Unity and Unreal, they're doing that in VFX and film now. I've
yeah,
actually seen YouTube classes popping up probably in the last few months. It says learn Unity for visual effects. So there's this whole aspect of film. So they go in thinking I'm going to make games, and it's like you can learn the engines and work in film. You can learn VR and work in an architecture company building out things because they want somebody to remodel this in 3D so that their customers can walk through it and make all those decisions instead of looking at a blueprint which no one knows how to read except an architect. So there's so many other aspects of work that you can do. And like, for instance, my student, I don't think she would have thought I'll be making video games for a water utility company because
yeah,
I did a capstone project about what you cannot flush down a toilet. And, so one of the things that I hope people learn in school, and I would hope they learn it out of school too, but I don't know if anybody else knows enough about the other industries that use the technology to tell them. But just the idea that the question is not, it's the question is, do you want to work with these skills? And then you don't take the games out of it, but you expand it. It's like, do you want to work every day? Do you want a job where you get up every day and you get to use Unity? Okay, let's expand all the different ways that you can do that because games is not the only way.
right. Absolutely. And I was gonna ask you about serious games, and you segued perfectly into it, right? Like, I guess, yeah. And I also, right, I've been doing games for 11 years in general, but like a large swath of my years in games were like non-game projects using games technology. And so like I'd love to hear like your perspective on like, some of the opportunities out there that people who might not realize like exist with serious games, or what even are serious games. I guess we could start there and then kind of talk about, yeah.
So serious games are games that are designed for more than entertainment. I don't want to say that some people say, oh, there's entertainment games and there's serious games. I would hope that serious games are going to be entertaining, which is why I encourage people to take game degrees and join game design programs, um, even if you're serious games. And so basically the short of it is if you want to make a game, you can make a game. If you want money making games, you're going to make serious games because those are the people who are going to come to you. And I think serious games is a great entry into game making. Those people are going to come to you and they're going to have ideas and possibly money. So, for instance, going back to this utility company, they're a nonprofit. I've had a paid side gig with a nonprofit who said we want to make a game about this, or we want to there. I've had people approach me with. I wrote a book. I'm doing a film. Is I want a game tie-in. So people will come to you and they have ideas. Sometimes they have money, especially if there's research grants involved and they want to teach something through games. So they got an idea, they've got money, and they need you to make something that they don't know how to make. And so you doing your own project, you can get on a games team. Getting on a major games team, I don't discourage this at all. There are small companies, there are big companies. The small companies, you're going to get a lot of experience because they don't have enough people. So you're going to wear a lot of hats and get to do a lot of different things. The large companies, they only have one, they might let you do one thing and you'll do one little thing and work on one little aspect of this game for 3 years. So it's kind of the same job, but what you gain is because they're so big, their organizational processes are amazing. And you will learn how to save things, how to find things, how to categorize things, how to do all the little nuances to make something absolutely perfect. So you get deep expertise in large companies. You get lots of different types of experiences in small companies. And for serious games, you're probably going to be in the small company hat. So they're going to come to you like I said, with a grant a lot of times. So you're going to have a paid position, you're going to get some experience. And the other thing, so they have experience, they have ideas and money, they don't have expertise. So if you need to take the time to get good at what you're doing until it meets your expectations, you're going to get to do that. But the expectations from them are probably not going to be the same as a large company that does that for a living. So you get to kind of splash around and get good while getting paid at this job. And you get to make something that hopefully makes you feel good as a person. Like you get to make something that you know is going to make somebody's life better when you're done with it. It's going to teach something, it's going to give an empathetic experience or something like that. So I love serious games, and I think that I think the prospect of working in serious games is overlooked.
Right.
When people see games and they think that they're going to make something that ends up on Steam, um, the serious game, like I said, they come with money, and you're not compete. And they have an audience. You're not competing with anybody on Steam. So if you want to, and a lot of times their games, um, because they're educational and they're paying with grant money, sometimes those games are free. So not only can you say I worked on, but when it's done, you can point people to it and they can probably play the experience. Whereas some companies, you work for them, you're under NDA, and if the game doesn't get shipped, then you have a ghost game on your CV. You did work on it, it's there, but unfortunately people can't see it. Or it ships, yay, it's behind an $80 paywall. It's so you're only going to reach, your friends and family that are going to pay $80 for the game. So overall, I'm not going to say working in serious games is better, but there are definitely advantages, and I don't think people consider that enough when they're going into game design. But that's where the jobs and the money is, I think.
You said it perfectly. Yeah, I just want to reiterate, right? Serious games tend to be a little bit more stable. Serious games also give you portfolio experience and
Yes.
uh, oh boy, how did I? Serious games also give you opportunity to do lots of things, and that's all gonna look better in your career. And I just want to reiterate that because especially starting out, right? Everybody wants to make the Call of Duties. Everybody wants to make Mario. Everybody wants to work on Fortnite. But like people like I'm sure if you talk to people you respect who work on a lot of those bigger games, they probably have a serious game or a thing that they worked on that was way smaller somewhere in their past too. Yeah.
Right. And you have to do the small things. Because watching, I think there was like a tweet or something. I think it was on Twitter or Facebook. This young developer said they spent 5 years working on a game and then they finally put it on Steam and nobody bought it. It's just drowned and they were so disappointed. Um, and what people were kind of saying is, make and release small things first. Small playable experiences, start small. Serious games is a way that you can do the start small things and get paid while you're doing that, but you have to do that anyway. So if you pivot into serious games, then you'll have clients. The clients will force you to do the things that will make you good. So you do that for a couple of years, and then you've got the skills to possibly be on a Fortnite or something else. Whereas if you don't go to serious games, and you just try to make something on your own, life gets in the way because you probably have a different job that's not in games, and so then you don't practice, and then you don't finish, or it takes a really long time, and then you're still competing with everybody who has more experience. So I think serious games are an amazing stepping stone to force you to get good at your craft and focus on it and please clients, deal with what other people's ideas are, and then get better. And then, you could end up in AAA, or you might decide to hang out in serious games for a while and just stay there and, you know,
Yeah.
pay your mortgage and not necessarily, not necessarily be a billionaire, but your mortgage is set. You got
Yeah.
what you need.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a plan to me for sure. Absolutely. And I guess to kind of you kind of started to talk about like some of the, good traits and good skills to develop, like, as you're kind of, polishing and, entering those first jobs. But are there any common habits or behaviors you see in like your most successful students that you'd like, just like to pair it as like these are the things that will make you successful in the industry?
Well, one thing I said is just the willingness to put in the work outside of class, the willingness to push yourself. Like, we'll give you a set of parameters that you need to do to finish your class assignment. Are you the type of person who, A, will put in the extra work to make those excellent, and also push yourself and say, okay, this is the design brief. But can you do this? But can I do that? But can I do that? And then adding in extra, exploring the engine, exploring whatever it is that you're doing. And the other thing I would say is learning to please clients. So with self-taught and also in school, you get to spend a lot of time making whatever you want. You can make your dream game. When you get a job, you can't do that. I've seen people kind of complain about artists who have their own style, and it's kind of like, if you're joining a game, you have to match your style to whatever they're doing. Programming, I think, is a little bit easier. I would love people to comment their code. The idea is people might have to come in and finish what you started if you get pulled on another project, or if they do a DLC or a part two and you're doing something else. You might come into the middle of something and you have to take over somebody else's project. So things like, being organized, commenting your code, and especially learning to work with clients and learning to work with a group, learning how to be creative when you don't get your creative way, I suppose, when you're doing something else. Creatives fall in love with our work. That's who we are. And we all have dream projects that we want to make. And I don't think there's a creative person who doesn't. But learning how to kind of put those aside and, work your dream, like after you get it, your dream job, you still might need to work on your dream project on the side, and have that be your side gig. And just being comfortable with that you've got to meet other people's expectations, because if they're paying you, you're making their dream.
Right.
And then eventually you get to make your own, hopefully.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think, yeah, it's so important to be able to work on a team and understand how to both manage, your stake in the project, but also like your stake is attached to everybody else's, right? Other departments depend on your output as well. Yeah.
Right. And another thing, I'm not sure. I think self-taught people probably get this, but they might drop things. So a self-taught person who's a programmer, for instance, might make a game, be able to source some art for it, but they might not be good at narrative, so they just don't have a narrative in their game. Whereas people, and hence they don't necessarily know how everybody else does what they do. So if you're in a group project in school, you have to kind of learn. You might not be the programmer, but you kind of understand what the programmer has to do. You are not the artist, but you need to know what the artist has to do. And I think in narrative, this is kind of known as the door problem, but I call it the talking tree problem. So if you're a narrative, if you're a game writer and you realize that somebody needs to know something at a certain point in the game, you're used to writing short stories and novels. And so you might say, oh, it's a fantasy story. They walk through the forest and I'll just have a tree tell them. So if you're writing a book or, short story, you go to the place where, they're in the forest and you start typing the tree said, and then blah, 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 blah. And that's pretty much all you have to do. If you've already gotten through half of the production of the game and you decide the tree should talk, the artist is gonna, the artist is gonna be like, do I need to animate mouth movements now? Do I need speech bubbles? How do I do that? Is the tree isolated from other trees, or did I just take a forest and put it in there because none of the trees were talking? Does this tree exist? The programmer's like, what do I need to do with this tree? Do I need to like program other things for this tree to do? Is this tree like, is it procedurally generated? Does it have to be like stuck in the middle of everything? Like, how do I get this tree into the game to make? How do I, the designer's like, how do I make sure the person goes to this one particular tree to make sure that it tells them this thing? How do I let them know this tree can talk? And so your one little the tree said in your own narrative is you kind of have to know what everybody else does and how much of a burden. It's not that you can't ask, but you need to have some idea of um how much you're asking is going to affect them. And it helps if you understand that there might be three ways to do this, and you can suggest the way that impacts production the least, because you understand what everybody else is doing, instead of being in this little hidey hole and doing what you're doing and not knowing how the rest of the process works.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's actually a perfect example, right? Like the cascading effects of a single change, right?
Exactly. I got
Uh,
some great information in the chat too.
yeah,
So
yeah. Do you
and
want
we'll get to
to?
that. Oh,
Yeah.
do you? Okay, well, I'll let me finish out your questions, and then I'll tackle those.
Okay, for sure, for sure. Yeah. And we're almost done with the question and answer on my part. I guess what do you think game developers currently in the industry could do to help out students who are studying to be developers in the future, right? Like,
I think the main thing that they could do is create more internship opportunities and junior opportunities so that people can actually get into the industry. Um, that that level at the bottom. I mean, from what I'm seeing, it seems like the job market in games is everyone's trying to poach the top artists, programmers, narrative. They're trying to poach the top people from each other. And there's this whole level of people who are trying to get in, and there's also a level people who are professional at other things that are trying to get in to the game industry, and that bottom layer just doesn't really exist. As far as, like I said, you kind of have to know somebody. It feels like you kind of have to know someone or have an exemplary body of work, which means you've probably been working on it, whether you're school taught or not, whether you have any school experience. If you've come in with 10 years of doing something, which means you probably started when you were about 10, then
Yeah, sure.
then you might be able to get one of those positions. So I think the industry, um, I've seen complaints that students aren't skilled enough. But the other thing is, they got to get in. A lot of it is there's still a lot of on the job training no matter what you do, because these companies are going to have their own processes, and they need to be tolerant of the fact that really, no matter where you're bringing in people from, there's a level of things they don't know. They have to actually be in the job to learn the extra step of things that you want them to know. We can't teach them that. So we can teach them the engine. We can teach them to comment their code. We can teach them art. They don't know how you do it. And every company has their own set of processes. So some sort of, internship, apprenticeship, junior onboarding that's stable, that we can tell students go apply here. They've got, processes to onboard people into the industry, which from what I know, I don't know the internal process of a lot of companies. I do think Riot has a really good system. They've got a really robust internship system where they do onboard people, and you can actually graduate from their internship and get a job at Riot. I think they're really good at that. So more companies that do that, that are prepared to bring people in, I think is probably the best thing. And they do work with universities. Whenever we ask for guest lectures and things, there's always somebody who raises their hand and say, yeah, I'll do a guest lecture. I'll come in and talk to the students. So they're usually really good at wanting to talk to the students, but that process of onboarding them into the industry, I think, would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think kind of the first part of what you talked about is just opportunities, right? Making opportunities for the students, and then making sure that like there's a proper on-ramp for those opportunities, right? Because I think it's so interesting. Sometimes I'll talk to students, and one of the most interesting questions I think, if especially if you're in the industry already, you don't think about is like people ask me like, so what's it like working in a game studio, right? Just the idea, like they don't know what the work of actually making a game on a professional level is. And so, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Like just even establishing like this is the expectations when you walk in the door. This is how we turn you from, an amateur developer into a professional. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And I've seen a few what a few companies do that I think is really good is they'll create a curriculum that teachers can kind of grab, and at least they know these are the things that we expect people to know if they are going to get a job there. So this is what you teach. And that's very helpful as well, because it's kind of the pros saying, this is what we want, and we'll just throw this at you, and then you'll know, teach to these standards, and that's, the beginning of what we want. But yeah, even though they do all of that, the jobs still need to be there. That pipeline of intern, apprentice to, developer still needs to be there. And I will, since I'm here and I've said I work at the University of Illinois, I will say one of the exciting things that we have is a campus-based studio. So, and it's student run. So those serious games I was talking about, we've got people who are researching. We've got PhD students who want to put a game in their project, and they don't know how to make a game, or they want some digital artifact in their project to do research. We've got one of the most amazing projects we have an archaeology teacher who wanted to do an archaeology dig in VR. And
Oh,
so she doesn't know how to do that. She's got other people doing it. So she started off grabbing some students and having them do independent studies with her. And now that we've got our campus-based studio, she gave it to the studio. And so it's managed through the studio. So those students are learning how to be managers in their departments, and also how to work on something that, again, will be used for educational purposes. So they can say, this thing I did is used in this class at the University of Illinois, and it's something that other people are touching and using and has been approved by somebody else. So campus-based studios, we're trying to bridge that gap by giving people, studio experience with on-campus clients. which is kind of like, if the utility company doesn't come along and have something for our students to do. That's us trying to bridge the gap. And so, yeah, having somewhere they can go after that where the company will carry them from there would be amazing.
Man, I wish I had that at my school. That would have been great, right? Yeah. Um, I love that. And kind of, I guess in that same vein, like what would you like to see in the future for students studying game development? Like, would you like to see more of these kind of campus-based studios and things like that?
I'd love to see more campus-based studios. I also think academia is sometimes when new technology comes out, we're bogged down. We've got our classes, we've got our research. We can't always jump on it the way that corporations have. So I'd like to see more flexibility within the universities for us as teachers and thought leaders in this space to be able to splash around and take a semester where it's like we're not teaching, we're learning what the heck is going on with AI, what that what is this new thing that Unreal came out with, what is everything. They keep adding things. They've added metahumans, they've added like bridge, they've added a whole bunch of things. So um for I would like in academia time for the teachers at least to like I said, take some sessions and maybe not teach, but just concentrated diving into the new technology that's coming out and the new things that are going on, and the new innovations in games so that we are constantly up to date with what we teach because our industry changes a lot. um, I'd like basically students just to keep having the opportunity to create and explore through games. I'd like I'd like programs that focus on serious games so that and one of the things that we're focusing on, well, with serious game students, if they come in and they know that they have to work on serious games, their outlook on games changes, and I'm hoping that that permeates through, for instance, player culture, not just in the not just in the there's no multiplayer button criticism, but also I'm hoping that somebody who comes into college and they have to make a game about, for instance, poaching and animal poaching or pollution or whatever, will end up being the type of conscientious person who gets on a MOBA and doesn't, like shout at women or something. Like I'm hoping that the idea that games are meaningful in a way that they weren't permeates into player behavior overall, and just games are serious. It doesn't mean that you can't have fun, but learning how to be like a decent person when you play them. And also, one of the things that I no matter which students I teach. So I was in Australia teaching a group full of students who were basically white because that's kind of who you find in Australia. Um, I did a whole week on or like I did a whole class on diversity uh in in games, and I started off with the Clark Doll project because at the time it was kind of it was a little bit after Gamergate, and I just knew that the pushback on online and everything was, oh, do care, we can make characters if they need to be black, we can put black characters in, or this is politically correct, like why do you want diversity, it's just a politically correct push. So I found videos of the Clark doll experiment where we've got 4 or 5 year olds and somebody's handing them a black doll and a white doll, and they're saying which one is nice, which is mean, which one is pretty, which one is ugly. And they're constantly pointing to the positive attributes and they're pointing to the white doll, and the negative attributes are the black doll. And these are black kids. And at the end of these question sessions, they would say, which doll looks like you? And you would see their faces crash. And they would kind of tentatively grab the black doll. And so I started up with those videos and I was like, you know what? Before you come at me and saying that this is politically correct, I'm just going to show you what happens in a world where we just make things and we don't include people. These
Right.
kids don't know that they are valued because they don't see themselves valued. And this is osmosis. Nobody's walking up to them going, you don't deserve anything. Nobody's saying that to them, to their faces. But, therefore, where are they getting this from? They're getting it from the air, the atmosphere that we create. So one of the things that I like about university is we get to, I don't know if those messages are going to take, but we get to teach them. We get to sit them down and say, you know what, diversity is important. And this is why. And this is what happens when you don't have diversity. And they have to sit there and listen to it. They don't have to take it. I mean, I don't know if they're going to absorb it. I can't control that. But we do get the opportunity to make them listen. And I would really like to see that. I'm alarmed at some of the diversity and diversity and inclusion initiatives that have fallen in companies and also in student admission and things like that. But as long as I'm a teacher, they're going to get that message from me at least. So I'm hoping that, you know, the educators themselves basically take that on as a mantle, and we get to the point where sensitivity readers and delving into cultures and meeting people from other cultures, and actually avoiding stereotypes and consciously learning how to make sure that everyone is represented and represented well, becomes a part of the academic culture of making games and teaching about game design.
I love it. Wow. I think creators and players across the board, I think we can all agree that a little more respect in games is welcome, right? Like, yeah. Um, wow. Well, I think that's a really powerful note to like end the conversation on, but thank you so much, Dr. Starks. Happy to have you here. Um, I think that's all the questions I have. But if you all have questions for Dr. Starks, please put them in chat. And while they're doing that, could you tell us like where should we find you on social? You got any links you want to drop? Any websites we should check out? Where can we find you?
Okay. So I do see in the chat there's been some a question from Dimitrik Bell. Are you still? Oh, yep, here. So should you be extra educated if you want better opportunities in game development and business? For that, I would say it really depends on the company, but traditionally there are companies who will let you come in self-educated and everything's fine until you want to until they start hiring management. So sometimes, and it really depends because in America, we teach you that you always want to move up, but really look at the job because some people don't want to be managers because once you're managers, you don't really get to make as much. You're more managing everybody else making things. So decide where you want to be. Do you want to be a maker or do you want to move up into management and you know, CEO level and things like that? Sometimes if you want to move up in the company and move into management and upper management levels, you will need a degree. And so some people go back to school after having, I mean, even like even Steven Spielberg ended up back to school. He went to UCLA. Schindler's List was like his capstone project. Of course, he got an A and an Oscar. But like, and he, you know, he's amazing. But you know, I think that basically some companies will want you to have a degree as you move up, and so it might matter then. And then you're going to want to evaluate where you want to be as far as education. Also, if you want to go into research, so for instance, VR is a big thing. I don't know it. I haven't looked recently, but for instance, VR is a big thing. Right before VR came out, there was a whole bunch of things about screen safety. How much screen time should people have? How much screen time should children have? What is the age? How old do you have to be before somebody puts a VR headset on you? Because we as adults are learning VR, but we already know we have a really good sense of what reality is. And then we go virtual and we take our sense of reality and then we take that into virtual and we can tell what's real and what's not. How does a 4-year-old who gets put on a VR headset see reality 15 years from now when they've grown up on it and there's this AR and VR and XR and reality and virtual is merging in ways that it never has? So if you want to go into the research aspect and you want to answer those type of questions, then you definitely want a higher degree. Let's see.
And
Maggie plus oneing using, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think a conversation I've heard lots of like in my like programmer circles, it's like more ethics in programming. That's a great conversation that we need to have. And I think especially as like you're saying, right, as we start to merge our virtual worlds and our real world, I think that's really important that we don't just offload those discussions and kick the can down the road. Yeah.
Right. And I think education is important then because corporations, depending on who they're run by, they're going to go where the money is and they're going to go, oh, hey, we'll make this so we can sell it. People will buy it. So let's push it out there. They won't always think of the ethical ramifications around it.
Right.
Whereas in school, you're going to hopefully have a bunch of academics from all different walks of life who will make you ask questions.
Right.
Even if it's just to write a paper, the question is presented to you and you have to do something with it. So I would say education is really good for that. Or have a bunch of philosophical, deep-minded friends who will
Sure.
hopefully do the same thing.
Sure.
Uh,
So,
using game, Maggie is talking about using game engines outside of games. So she uses in her job, she uses Unity for AR applications in automotive. Yeah, so they're modeling cars in 3D. They're doing a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with games. So learning the tech is always good. Um, Serious games, uh, some disappointments. Game ships doesn't do well. Oh, gets canceled. And that happens a lot. So yeah, some things that happen when in game companies that you should be emotionally prepared for. And another reason why, make a lot of little games on your own and do some serious games and then dive into the bigger ones. Uh, when you design something for a game, what you're really doing is asking your coworkers to do work, make sure it's worth it. Yeah. So the whole I want to add something to the game way late. Yeah, make sure that you're not causing crunch for everybody else with your suggestion, especially if you have the power to make sure it happens. If you're like a person who's kind of way down here going, hey, I think this might be a good idea, and people can overrule you easily, then you can probably suggest the world. But when you get to the point where you can make the decision and say, your suggestion becomes their reality, then it's really good to know how it's going to impact everybody else.
Right.
Um, I think that Roderick has Hosek, I think the networking aspect of getting a game dev degree from a school with industry ties is hard to overstate the importance of. Yeah, just getting to know people and getting exposure. Uh, the Game Developers of Color conference is this week. So I had a class today and they had some really good talks. And so I was like, you know what? I happen to get a ticket to a game conference. So we're going to a game conference. I guess I wasn't supposed to do that, but my students saw like one or two talks streamed. And on Friday they're going to do something in like indigenous games, and basically it's kind of like I want to see the conference. I'm at work, I'm teaching, so we're all going to see the conference. But I also wanted them to understand, again, this is an industry. We've got conferences, we've got professional talks on this. This is not just it's not just a hobby. And, we've got a lot of professionalism around how we do things. And so I like to expose them to that. Um, not having that, the networking means not having access to most entry level positions. And success in games is skill plus networking. Sometimes knowing the right person is even more important than being talented. Yeah, sometimes people, if they like you and you've got potential, they'll take you on under their wing and teach you. And it could be a mentor situation outside of their job, or it could be like well, the thing is, they know when junior positions are coming up. They might say, we're starting a project. Somebody said, hey, let's have 2 juniors on. I'm pegging you and make sure you get your portfolio together because you're going to need to show it to me officially in about 2 months. And so that type of information is invaluable. And so if you can get to know people, whether it's conferences at school from your guest lecturers or what have you, or through your teachers, that kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that you really need in order to get into the business. Oh, I got your name right. Yay. Dimitrik. Um, so what do you think of and Abu's iPhone is asking me. I'm getting talked to by an iPhone. Oh, I know it's kidding. So what do you think of Unity being in game design programs after what happened with them in terms of their revenue fared backle? Um, so I did hear a lot of Godot around that. I did hear Unreal. One of the things that is going to be a problem and probably is a problem for wannabe game developers, especially those outside of school. So we happen to teach Unreal on campus. It's difficult. Teaching game design on campus is difficult because you need to basically have your entire department willing to throw money at it. You need a room full of game developer development level equipment. So we need at least 30 computers that can run Unreal. This hardware divide is what I'm seeing a lot. So a lot of people, they might have heard of Unreal. They can't pivot from Unity to Unreal because Unreal takes more hardware, um, higher hardware specs than Unity. If Unity is running on your computer, it doesn't mean you can run Unreal. If Unity is lagging your computer, you can't touch Unreal. It's just not going to happen. So that's why people are pivoting down. I think some people are pivoting down to Godot, which is, I think, Godot is getting attention, and that's great. There's also other smaller engines, uh, like there's so if you're doing Godot, you're probably not going to do Twine, but Twine is a great prototyping tool that some people haven't heard of. There's also things like Construct 3. There's Gdevelop, which I'm not, I like Construct better, but there are other smaller engines. I did hear that Unity has already changed they've changed their revenue model. I don't remember the details, but they've already made changes because people were just thinking, once you hit $200,000 and 200,000 downloads, you can't go back from that. You'll never get less. So you're just going to owe them for the rest of the rest of the life of that game, unless people pull the game and say you can't download it anymore. And then they got to track down all of the little people who will say, it's software preservation, so we're just going to let you download it from here, and you got to track all those down, because if they're tracking installs electronically, it doesn't matter where they install from. Um, so, uh, and do I think programs using Unity will reorganize how they teach their programs? I think the best game design program is something that's going to teach people several engines. You want to know the smaller ones to prototype something quickly. You want to know the larger ones to go into the industry. I've got a bunch of grad students right now. I'm teaching them Construct 3. And the reason why I'm doing that is because these are people who are, they're majoring in language education. They're majoring in, like, the architecture ones would probably want to use Unity. They're majoring in like social justice, social work, and they want to make games based on that. Unity and Unreal are probably overkill for them, because they're going to want to make games that teach their concepts. So I wouldn't want to, like, those are the people, they're going to be independent practice doing something else that's probably not in the industry. So they might not need all of the heaviness of Unity and Unreal and the learning curve to learn Unity and Unreal and make something really, really good. So it's also about understanding, what are you going to do with your games? Again, the technology is used in several places. If you're going to do serious games and you're going to try to push serious games, while you're doing your private practice of language education, for instance, you want to make games for yourself, for your company to do that, you might not have time or place or inclination to do Unity. So you're going to, or Unreal. You're probably not going to have an Unreal worthy computer if you're teaching language design on your own, unless you really, really want that. So it's understanding what engines are out there and what purpose are you making games for? What audience? Are you making something that's good enough to pitch so that you can get bigger, more money? So, for instance, some people, um, again, nonprofits, they need to show their grant committee that they've made something. So they only need something at prototype level, because they're trying to get grant money to make it at Unity Unreal level, and then they're going to go hire people to do that. So, but as far as the devs that were working on Unity, I feel they're better now. It says Chris Burr says Unity Personal Edition won't change devs unless you make won't charge devs unless you make 2000K or more. Should still be safe for students until Unity execs change their minds. Yeah, I think the people in a pinch are the people who were near completion on a Unity project and they don't have time or inclination to go redo their project in something else. And so they're like, do we ship or not? Or do we ship and we keep track of how many games, and then we say we're only going to sell like a limited amount of them. And then the bigger companies, they're probably going to stay the same now, but some of the big wigs that Unity thinks they're going to get money from, they have the option to pull the game, redo it in something else, and then come out with a remaster in 2 or 3 years if they don't want to pay. So it's going to be interesting to see how that moves forward in the industry, and whether Unity is going to actually, you know, get what they need in order to stay afloat while not taking off all the indies. Because the thing is, once you get on an engine, you probably stay on it. So I think it would be great if they would still stay flexible enough to allow the indies to start using Unity and then grow with that. Um, so Chris Burr says, already seeing that with Gen Z growing up with touch screens. Oh yeah, the differences in how people use technology and their sense of reality and their expectations of what things will do. We've gone through more change, I think, in the last 100 years than we have in 1,000 before them, as far as technology and just the ramp up of what we can do. Yeah, I would love to see, how some of the old ancient people who are long gone would, like if Alexander Graham Bell could figure out like what we did with the phone. you know, I think
Right.
that'd be fascinating. Like, the Wright brothers, if they could come back and see, like, we've got space shuttles now. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Right. Or even like, the idea of like, people watching a movie of the train coming at them in the theater and freaking out and running, right? Can you imagine all the screens
Yeah.
you have? Like,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh. And now we've got VR where it really like
right.
does run at you.
Right.
Um, Will Burton, some companies allow equal pay bands for both management and individual contributors, so you don't have to swap. Yeah, so sometimes you can rise in the industry as a maker, and you don't have to switch to management at least for pay reasons. So yeah, it's becoming more and more that you're going to think about your duties and what do you want to do when you go to work every day. Do you want to switch to management or not? Uh, Timothy Staten Davis. Lots of great points tonight. We got to start incorporating more research like yours into high profile experiences going forward. Thoughtful and important work. Thank you. Um, and Roderick, thanks for the reminder. I got to check out GDoc this year too. It's going on for 2 more days, so hop on. Yeah, so that's everything in the chat. Are there any more questions, comments, anything else?
Yeah. Any last questions or comments before we let Dr. Starks go? Also, you got to drop your links. I think you skipped that
Oh,
part.
right. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
no worries.
gonna I opened them all so that I could actually do this. So Twitter, for those of you who've seen Coming to America, his mama named him Twitter. I'm gonna call him Twitter. Um,
At Katryna Starks.
yeah, and so everywhere I'm me everywhere. Let's see, here's my FB
Mhm.
and LinkedIn and Game Studies and Design at UIUC. And that is, yeah, that's it. And then just for funsies, um, ah man, I wish I could find let's see. Here we
Yep.
go.
Were you able to find it?
Yep.
Yeah.
This is, oh, if it would copy and paste for me. Copy, paste, and my obsession. Um, which could be your obsession.
Oh, I love it. I
You
love it.
might get lost on those websites. Um, so
You definitely inspired me to up my pin game for sure. Hey. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Starks. I learned a ton about games and academia and the values and advantages and cons. And I think it's always great to like kind of hear you probably have more of a view to like what students of game development today struggle with than a lot of us in the industry. So thank you so much for giving us some of that insight. Yeah.
thank you. It was great being here. Yeah, and I love talking to people. I know and I love the variety of people that have attended. We've got people who've been in the industry for years. We've got people who are basically working their way in, teaching themselves, doing everything that they can. Probably a few people who might be in academia. So it's just a pleasure to talk to all of you. And I hope that no matter what. No matter where you are in game dev, that I have said something that is insightful and helpful.
You absolutely have. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching with us tonight. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a good night. Bye.
Good night.